Once Upon a Time in Big Sur by Clarissa Bell. Cover design by Antonio Canaleas, illustrator Keith Larson, author photo Robert W. Zentis, Selena's Living Poetry and Prose project manager and layout Michael Houston, editor Ann West, book coordinator and editor William Nish, narrator John Tobin. This is in dedication to the memory of the American elm tree in Jewel Park and to all those who tried to save her.
I'd better call him right away and see if we can all go together this afternoon. He won't mind the short notice a bit, Lisbeth explained as she hastily dabbed last traces of whipped cream left by the profit roll au chocolat from the corners of her mouth. He's a consummate free spirit who lives entirely in the moment, she hastened to add, while taking one last and deeply appreciative sip of espresso. And we happened to sit together on the board of the Carmel Art Association. Thus far, the luncheon at Fandango had gone exquisitely well, and had been met with exacting approval of the dancers of Bougainville, Boogie who were watching the entire production from their usual front row seat on the wall above the table for two, where Lisbeth and Jean-Noel were sitting. The woman's eyes in particular had seemed to glaze over longingly off the canvas and subtly onto the delicate sand dabs and the lemon butter sauce along the tender young stalks of asparagus that had adorned the diner's plates, while the man, as was his habit, seemed incapable of taking his gaze off anything but the woman herself, which was not to say that he had not been eavesdropping on the conversation and taking perhaps more than a passing interest in the curious saga as told by Jean-Noel in his regard for the recent odyssey into Big Sur in search of the true identity of his father. In telling the story and the subsequent events of the past week, however, there was much that Jean-Noel had chosen to leave out. He somehow could not bring himself to tell Lisbeth of his meeting at Nepenthe with the somewhat ruffian Christy O'Keefe, and the very real possibility that Father Noel, Jean-Noel, had so earnestly been seeking, all that in all likelihood had been a big burly dude, kind of like a bear, who apparently spoke little, drooled much. He had instead led Elspeth to believe that his fact-finding mission had been for the most part unsuccessful and had turned up relatively nothing. This had, in turn, prompted Elspeth to think her friend of whom she had been speaking and whom she had felt certain could be of invaluable assistance to Jean-Noel. He is really a remarkable human being, a fine artist, a writer, a philanthropist, and most important, a local historian with deep roots in the Big Sur community. Why, he even owns the breathtaking spread down there, although he rarely inhabits it. It's a large family compound he acquired through the inheritance years ago. Seems his grandfather invented something that forever changed the world. My friend, being the humble soul that he is, will never say exactly what the invention was, but it has left him an enormously wealthy man, not to mention a most generous one. He's not only given you the shirt off his back, but also the answer to all your questions. Sadly, the enthusiasm was so ardently expressed by Elizabeth would seem indeed to have fallen on deaf ears. Jean-Noel, it must be confessed, had been stealing furtive glances at his watch the whole time, and his mind had been clearly elsewhere. I should actually be on the road by now, he offered apologetically. I promised Alice I'd be home for dinner, and we've already made plans to go to Le Moniton in the afterward to the Areo Theatre to see her favorite French films, Cocteau's Beauty and the Beast. I can't be late. Thanks all the same, Elizabeth, but it's just not possible. No, I suppose not, Elizabeth replied tepidly. It's too rushed, isn't it? Please tell Alice I'll come down for the memorial service. Just let me know as soon as you can and have an exact date. Jean-Noel, please allow me to pick up the check. You run along, I insist. Thanking Elizabeth profusely, Jean-Noel was only too glad to obediently run along as he'd been told, Elizabeth was only too glad to be left alone with Edith Piaf warbling Je ne regrette rien competently in the background. Having brought Jean Noel to the water, so to speak, she of course realized that she could not make him drink. However, at the same time, she could not help but feel him to be passing up a golden opportunity. Putting the matter under further scrutiny, Elizabeth glanced up for the confirmation from the timeless couple who seemed well past the age of youthful folly as they danced perpetually above her head at the Bougival. This time, however, she found it was not the dancers themselves who caught her eye. It was, strangely enough, the discarded cigarette butt and the cast-off iron nosegay that lay so vulnerably on the ground at the lower left corner of the painting, suspended for all time in both prominence and humble obscurity. They did much to sum up for Elspeth this curious essence of the friend she had mentioned to Jean Noel. It would seem that the same effort had taken him to detach himself from society. He had acquired a certain unbidden aurora of notoriety, not unlike what they had for Jay Gatsby before him. Glamorous rumors had always circulated freely about his past, especially among the members of the Carmel Art Association. That he was originally from the South seemed to be generally agreed upon. Some went on to say that he had studied writing at Princeton, while others begged to differ, that it was the art of the proud. Quite a few insisted it was both. It still seems as if to be believed he had won a Pulitzer Prize in poetry years ago, as well as had several paintings placed in the permanent collection of the de Young. It was also rumored that he may have even taught briefly at Cal Arts in Valencia before turning his back on it all and taking up permanent residence in Big Sur as a jack of all trades. In short, he was a rare soul and not without a generous touch of the poet. With or without Jean Noel's blessing, Lisbeth resolved that she would call her friend anyway and make inquiries herself. She would do it, if nothing else, for Alice's sake. And she had to admit that because she had harbored a genuine fondness for this dear man and welcomed the excuse to call him, old-fashioned as her friend was, and quite often out of range of telephone reception, he thus relied on answering service to receive messages from those privileged enough to have his number. Elspeth pulled out a tattered address book from her purse just to make sure she had it. Looking under the letter O, she was relieved to see his name safely ensconced there, O'Keefe, and quite boldly read, Christy O'Keefe, to be exact.